She was only 19 years old, her calico dress shredded to ribbons that barely clung to her frame, the blue fabric now stained brown with dried blood and Dakota dust. Her skin painted in shades of purple and black from fists that had broken her ribs, her spirit, her will to draw another breath. Dirt crusted so thick on her face you could barely see the freckles that once danced across her nose. Her lips cracked open like dry riverbeds, bleeding where the sun had blistered them past recognition. And her body lay twisted among the sagebrush and rocky ground at the base of Thunder Ridge. Half buried beneath pine branches, someone had thrown over her like she was nothing more than yesterday's garbage. Most men riding through these Dakota Badlands in the summer of 1876 would have kept their horses moving, written her off as just another casualty of a territory that swallowed souls whole and spit out bones. The frontier had no shortage of bodies, no shortage of stories that ended in unmarked graves and questions nobody bothered to ask. Every day someone disappeared into the wilderness, claimed by weather or wildlife or the violence that had become as common as breathing in these parts. But when Kangi pulled those branches aside, expecting to find a deer carcass or maybe a dead coyote, he realized the pile of rags beneath was breathing, barely, her chest rising and falling in shallow, desperate gasps. Her eyes flickered open, cloudy and distant like she was already halfway to the spirit world. And out came a whisper so faint he almost thought it was the wind rattling through the pines. "Let me die in this spot. Not save me. Not help me. Not please, I'm begging you. Let me die in this spot." The words struck Kangi harder than any cavalry saber he had ever faced in battle. He froze there, crouched beside this broken young woman, his hand still gripping the pine branch he had pulled away. And for a split second, he felt the old ghosts of his past come crawling up from the place he had buried them deep in his chest. He had left plenty of people to die before, back during the wars. White settlers mostly. Women and children too. Now picture this. You are Kangi. You are 38 years old, though you look 50 from the weight you carry. You have already watched your wife and infant daughter burn alive in a cabin set on fire by gold miners who wanted your land. You have seen your brother shot down like a dog in the street of Deadwood for the crime of defending himself against a drunk prospector. You have seen your father, a respected elder, hung from a tree by men who called it justice. You live each day with rage, with a hatred so deep it has become part of your bones, riding alone through territories where your people are being hunted, driven out, destroyed. And then you stumble upon a young white woman whose family was likely destroyed by men, just like the ones who destroyed yours. She's asking not for a hand, but for permission to stop fighting. Tell me, would you ride away, let the coyotes and vultures finish what those men started? Or would you kneel there, hands trembling, knowing that saving her might mean facing the kind of mercy you swore you would never show to a white face again? Kangi's chest tightened as he looked at her face. The years of loss and loneliness that had hardened his own features felt lighter than the weight of that one whispered plea. He could walk away. Nobody would blame him. His people certainly would not. The Dakota Territory was full of the forgotten, full of bodies that nobody claimed, nobody mourned. Yet something in him refused to let her join them. Maybe it was his daughter's face he saw in hers, the same small nose, the same way her eyes seemed to search for something beyond the pain. Maybe it was the Creator giving him one last chance to do something that did not involve blood and vengeance. Maybe it was just exhaustion, the kind that comes when you have been angry for so long that you forget what anything else feels like. Kangi bent down, slid his arms beneath her body, and felt the weakness of her frame against his chest. She weighed almost nothing, like a bird with broken wings. Every step back toward his horse, he knew this was no ordinary crossing of paths. He was not just carrying a half-dead white woman. He was carrying the truth of a past he thought he had buried forever, along with his wife and child. His horse, a grey mare he had named Tadewi, nickered softly as he approached. Kangi carefully lifted Hannah onto the horse, then swung up behind her, holding her steady against his chest as Tadewi began the long journey back to his camp. The ride back took 2 hours through terrain that would kill most men trying to navigate it alone. Narrow paths along cliff edges, where one wrong step meant 100-foot drop. Dense forest, where the trees grew so close together, you had to know exactly where to turn. Creek crossings where the water ran fast and cold, deep enough to drown a man if he lost his footing. This land was unforgiving, which was exactly why Kangi had chosen it. His camp was hidden deep in the Black Hills, a place the cavalry had not yet discovered, nestled in a small valley between 2 ridges that made it invisible from any direction unless you knew exactly where to look. A place where he could live without watching over his shoulder every moment. It was simple. A hide shelter he had built himself, stretched buffalo skins over lodge poles, big enough for one person to sleep comfortably. A fire pit lined with river stones, arranged in a circle according to the old ways his father taught him. A stream nearby for water, cold and clear, fed by snowmelt from the mountains. Nothing fancy, nothing permanent. He had learned long ago not to get attached to places. He laid her down on a buffalo hide inside the shelter, the same hide his wife had tanned the winter before she died. He folded another hide to make a pillow, positioning her head carefully. Then he gave her water from a leather pouch, just a few drops at first, then a bit more when she did not choke. And for the first time saw the color return to her cheeks, faint but real. She coughed, then drank more. Her eyes focused on his face, and he saw the moment she realized what he was. Saw her take in his long black hair, the copper tone of his skin, the traditional clothes he wore. The moment fear tried to surface through the pain, but she was too weak for fear. Too broken for anything except the breath moving in and out of her lungs. Kangi sat back, giving her space, not wanting to crowd her. He had seen enough frightened animals to know that sometimes the kindest thing you can do is simply exist nearby, without demanding anything. Her name was Hannah Winters. Her voice cracked, as if even her name had been beaten out of her bit by bit. Between sips of water and shallow breaths, she told him pieces of her story, fragments that came out in no particular order. She spoke slowly, pausing often to gather strength. And Kangi listened without interrupting. She had grown up in Ohio, in a town called Marion, where her father ran a dry goods store and her mother taught Sunday school at the Methodist church. She had 2 younger brothers, William and Thomas, both still children when the family decided to head west in the spring of 1875. Her father believed in manifest destiny, believed God wanted white Christians to spread across this continent and bring civilization to the wilderness. Kangi said nothing, but his jaw tightened. He had heard that story before, had heard it from the mouths of men who set his village on fire. The Winters family made it as far as a settlement called Bison Creek, about 40 miles south of where Kangi had found Hannah. They built a small cabin from logs they cut themselves, spent weeks notching and fitting each piece. They started clearing land for crops, back-breaking work that left her father's hands bleeding. They made friends with other settler families, people who gathered for church services in a barn and shared what little they had. For a year, everything seemed possible, hard but possible. Then the trouble started. There was a group of men, Hannah said, her voice dropping to barely a whisper, drifters and outlaws who had set up camp in the hills nearby. They called themselves the Bison Creek Regulators, claimed they were protecting settlers from Indian attacks. But what they really did was steal livestock, extort money from families, and terrorize anyone who would not pay them for protection. Her father refused to pay, stood on his porch with his shotgun, and said he would not be bullied by thugs pretending to be lawmen. Said he had not come all this way to hand over what little he had to men who produced nothing except fear. That was 3 months ago. The regulators came at night, 8 men on horseback, torches in hand, faces covered with bandanas. They surrounded the cabin and set it on fire from all sides at once, making sure nobody could escape. Hannah only survived because she'd been in the outhouse when the attack started. She heard her mother screaming from inside the cabin, heard her brothers crying for help. heard her father firing his shotgun until the shot stopped and there was only the sound of flames consuming everything she loved. She tried to run to them, but one of the men caught her before she could get close, grabbed her by the hair and dragged her backward, threw her onto his horse, took her back to their camp in the hills while her family burned. Kanji listened, his face like stone, but inside something was shifting. This story was too familiar. The cruelty, the fire, the screaming. He had lived this story from the other side. For 3 months, Hannah continued, they kept her in that camp, used her in ways she could not bring herself to describe, passed her between them like property, beat her when she fought back, which was often at first. But as the weeks turned into months, resistance gave way to hollow acceptance. She stopped fighting, stopped eating unless forced, stopped speaking unless spoken to, stopped thinking about anything except how to make it end. 2 days ago, one of the men, the youngest one who seemed to have some shred of conscience left, got drunk and told her they were planning to kill her. Said the leader was tired of feeding her. Said they would take her out to Thunder Ridge and put a bullet in her head. But when they got there, something happened. An argument between the men. Maybe the young one tried to stop them. Maybe they just got careless. In the confusion, Hannah ran. Injured, weak, barely able to stand. She ran into the wilderness with nothing except the clothes on her back and the certainty that she would rather die free than live one more day in that camp. She collapsed at the base of Thunder Ridge, lay there waiting for death, even pulled branches over herself, trying to disappear, and then Kangi found her. Now, sitting in his shelter, drinking water that tasted like life itself, Hannah looked at the Dakota warrior who had saved her and asked the question that had been forming since she woke up. Why? Kangi stood, walked to the entrance of the shelter, and stared out at the darkening sky. Why? Such a simple question, such an impossible answer, because 20 years ago he had been the one setting fires. He had been the one standing outside burning lodges, listening to families scream. Not white families, but Crow families, Pawnee families. Other tribes his people had been at war with long before the white men came. He had told himself it was survival, that it was the way of warriors, that mercy was weakness. And then the white miners came to his village, and he learned what it felt like to be on the other side of that fire. His wife, Winona, had been making breakfast when they broke down the door. His daughter, only 2 years old, had been playing with a corn husk doll he had made for her. The miners wanted the land because they thought there was gold in the creek. When Kangi's father refused to leave, they made an example. 6 lodges burned that morning. 14 people died. Gagi had been out hunting, returned to find his entire world reduced to ash and bones. He found Winona's body in the ruins, his daughter still clutched in her arms. Both of them burned beyond recognition except for the silver bracelet he had given his wife on their wedding day. He did not tell Hannah any of this. Not yet. She only saw a Dakota warrior who gave her water and shelter, and for the first time in 3 months did not raise a hand against her. She even managed a small smile through swollen lips. A smile that cut Kangi deeper than her bruises did, because he knew something she did not. He knew the blood on her story might be the same blood on his hands from a different time, a different fire, and here is where you need to ask yourself a question. What happens when the man who saves you carries the same capacity for violence as the men who destroyed you? When mercy and cruelty live in the same heart, that question alone is enough to keep you here, because you and I both know the truth. Redemption is never clean. It is never simple. And sometimes the hardest person to forgive is yourself. Hannah fell asleep shortly after, exhausted beyond measure, her body finally allowing itself to rest. Kangi sat by the fire outside his shelter, watching the stars emerge one by one. He thought about the men who had taken her, tortured her, planned to kill her. He thought about riding to their camp and doing to them what they had done to so many others. But he also thought about the cycle, the endless, grinding cycle of violence that had consumed his entire life. His people hurt by whites, whites hurt by his people. Everyone convinced their violence was justified. Somewhere in the hills, a wolf howled. Genji closed his eyes and made a decision. He would let Hannah heal. He would keep her safe. And when she was strong enough, he would help her leave this territory, start over somewhere the ghosts could not find her. What he did not know was that helping Hannah Winters would set in motion a chain of events that would force him to confront not just his past, but the men who embodied everything he had spent 20 years trying to forget. Trouble has a way of finding men who try to live quiet. And in the Dakota Territory of 1876, Trouble rode with guns loaded and mercy left behind in the dust. Morning came cold and grey to the Black Hills, the kind of dawn where the sun struggles to break through clouds that sit heavy on the mountains like wet wool. Genji woke to the sound of Hannah crying in her sleep, soft whimpering sounds that spoke of nightmares no amount of rest could chase away. He had slept outside by the fire, giving her privacy and space, his rifle across his lap because old habits never truly died. The embers from last night still glowed faint orange beneath the ash, and he stirred them back to life, adding kindling until flames rose again. Inside the shelter, Hannah's eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the dim light filtering through the buffalo hide walls. For a moment she looked confused, disoriented, her hand reaching instinctively to her side, as if expecting to find herself back in that camp, back in that nightmare. Then she saw Kangi's silhouette outside by the fire, and remembered being found, remembered being carried, remembered choosing to accept help instead of death. She tried to sit up, and immediately regretted it. Every muscle in her body screamed protest. Every bruise announced itself with fresh waves of pain. Her ribs felt like they were grinding against each other with each breath. The cuts on her feet, torn open from running barefoot through the wilderness, had crusted over but threatened to split again with any movement. Genji heard her gasp and appeared in the doorway, a wooden bowl in his hands. Steam rose from whatever was inside, carrying the smell of herbs and meat. He knelt beside her without speaking, set the bowl down within reach, then retreated to give her space. The gesture was careful, deliberate, the actions of someone who understood trauma and the importance of not crowding someone who had been caged. The bowl contained a thin soup, broth with small pieces of venison and wild onions, sage and other plants she could not identify. Her stomach, which had been empty for days, cramped at the smell. She lifted the bowl with shaking hands and took a small sip. The warmth spread through her chest like forgiveness, like hope, like something she had forgotten existed. While she ate, Kanji busied himself around the camp. He checked his snares down by the creek, finding 2 rabbits that would provide meat for the next few days. He gathered firewood from the deadfall in the forest, stacking it near the shelter where it would stay dry. He refilled the water pouches from the stream, the cold mountain water so clear you could see every stone on the bottom. All the while, he kept half his attention on the surrounding forest, watching for movement, listening for sounds that did not belong, because he knew they would come looking for her. Men like the Bison Creek regulators did not let their property simply walk away. They would track her, hunt her, make an example of her to maintain their reputation of cruelty. It was only a matter of time. By midday, Hannah had managed to move from lying down to sitting up, her back against the support pole of the shelter. The soup had given her strength, not much but enough to stay conscious for longer periods. She watched Kanji work, studied him with the careful attention of someone trying to understand whether she was safe or had simply traded one captor for another. What she saw confused her. Every story she had ever heard about Indians painted them as savage, as violent, as fundamentally different from civilized people. But Kanji moved with a quiet efficiency that spoke of discipline and care. He wasted nothing, used everything, treated the land around him with a respect she had never seen white men show. When he skinned the rabbits, he spoke words in his language she could not understand, what sounded like prayers or thanks. When he hung the hides to dry, he did so with the same attention her mother had given to important tasks. By afternoon, she found the courage to speak beyond single words and fragments. Her voice was still rough, still damaged from screaming and thirst. But it was hers again? Why are you helping me? Kanji was working on repairing a tear in his saddle, his hands moving with practiced skill as he stitched leather with sinew. He did not look up immediately, took his time finishing the stitch before setting the work aside. When he finally met her eyes, his expression was unreadable. Because someone should have helped my family when they needed it. The words hung in the air between them. Hannah waited for more, but Kanji offered nothing else. Instead, he stood and walked to the edge of camp where the forest began, his eyes scanning the tree line with the intensity of a man who expected trouble. And trouble was exactly what was coming, 5 miles south, in a canyon that provided natural shelter from wind and prying eyes. The Bison Creek regulators were breaking camp. 8 men in total, though calling them men was generous. They were predators who had found that the lawless frontier provided perfect hunting grounds for those willing to take what they wanted by force. Their leader, a man named Cyrus Pike, stood 6 feet tall with a beard that hung to his chest and eyes that had seen too much violence to remember what mercy looked like. Pike was studying the ground where Hannah had escaped 2 days prior, reading the story written in disturbed earth and broken vegetation. He was a tracker, had learned the skill hunting runaway slaves before the war, and had found the talent remained profitable after. The signs were clear enough. She had run north, staggered more than ran based on the uneven gait of her footprints, and she had not stopped until she physically could not continue. Beside him, the youngest of the group, a man barely 20 named Jesse Cord, shifted nervously. He had been the one to let her escape, distracted by his own moral crisis while the others argued. He had not meant for it to happen, but he also had not tried very hard to stop it. Now he was paying the price in Pike's cold displeasure. "You want to find her real bad, do you not, Jesse?" Pike's voice was soft, which made it more dangerous. When Pike yelled, you knew where you stood. When he went quiet, people died. "I will find her, Mr. Pike, I swear it. You will indeed. Because if you do not, I will assume you let her go on purpose. And you know what I do to traitors." Jesse knew. Everyone knew. Last year, a man named Crawford had tried to leave the group, take his share of money and start over somewhere clean. They found Crawford's body 3 weeks later, or what the animals had left of it, staked out in the sun with his eyelids cut off so he had to watch the vultures coming. The group mounted up, 8 horses loaded with supplies and weapons, men who looked more like a raiding party than anything resembling law enforcement. They followed Hannah's trail north, moving slowly but steadily, reading sign that most men would miss. Broken twigs at knee height, disturbed pine needles, a smear of blood on a rock where she had fallen and caught herself. By late afternoon, they were only 3 miles from Kangi's camp. Back in the hidden valley, Kanji felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He had learned long ago to trust that feeling, the animal instinct that warned of danger before the conscious mind could process why. He walked back to the shelter where Hannah was resting, his face serious. "We need to move, tonight, before the sun is fully down." Hannah's eyes widened. "They found us, not yet, but they will. Men like the ones who took you do not give up easily. They will track you, and my camp is not hidden well enough to stop determined trackers. But I cannot walk, I can barely stand. Then I will carry you. But we cannot stay here." There was no time to argue. Kanji moved with swift efficiency, gathering essential supplies. Food for 3 days, water pouches, blankets, his rifle and ammunition. He left everything else, the shelter he had built, the hides he had tanned, the small comforts he had accumulated over months of solitary living. None of it mattered if they were dead. He fashioned a carrier from a blanket and 2 long poles, creating a travois that his horse could drag. It was not comfortable, but it would allow them to move faster than if he carried Hannah in his arms. He lifted her as gently as possible, but she still gasped in pain as broken ribs shifted. He secured her to the travois with strips of leather, making sure she would not fall even on rough terrain. "Where are we going?" "North. Into the deep mountains where horses cannot easily follow. There are places in the high country, caves and valleys that only my people know. We can hide there until you heal enough to travel properly. And then what?" Kanji swung up onto his horse, took the lead rope of the travois in one hand. Then we get you far away from the Dakota territory. Canada, maybe, Oregon, somewhere these men cannot reach. He did not mention what he planned to do after that. Did not mention that once Hannah was safe, he intended to come back. To find the Bison Creek regulators, to make them pay for what they had done, not just to her, but to everyone they had victimized. He had spent 20 years avoiding violence, burying his rage, trying to live quietly. But some debts could only be paid in blood. They left the camp just as the sun touched the western peaks, long shadows stretching across the valley floor. Kanji led them north along paths only animals used, trails that would be difficult for mounted men to follow in darkness. The travois bounced and jarred over rough ground, each impact sending fresh pain through Hannah's body. But she bit down on a piece of leather Kanji had given her and made no sound. Behind them, less than an hour after they departed, Cyrus Pike and his men rode into the abandoned camp. Pike dismounted slowly, his eyes taking in every detail. The shelter still warm from body heat, the fire pit with embers not yet cold. Food supplies missing, but other possessions left behind. The sign was clear. They ran, recently, within the last 2 hours. One of his men, a scarred brute named Harker, spit tobacco juice into the dirt. We can catch them before midnight if we ride hard. Pike shook his head. No, we track them careful. Whoever was here knew we were coming, left before we arrived. That means either luck or skill, and I do not believe in luck. We go slow, we go smart, and we do not rush into a trap. You think it is Indians? Pike knelt, studying a moccasin print in the soft earth near the fire. I know it is, and not just any Indian. These tracks, this camp, the way it is hidden. This is a warrior's camp, someone who knows how to live in these mountains, how to disappear. That makes him dangerous. Jesse Cord felt ice form in his stomach. He had not considered that Hannah might find help, might find someone capable of protecting her. He had assumed she would die alone in the wilderness, that their sin would be erased by natural causes. But if she had found a protector, if someone was actively hiding her, then everything became more complicated. Pike stood, brushed dirt from his hands. We make camp here tonight. Rest the horses. At first light we track them properly. And when we find them, we kill whoever is protecting the girl. Make her watch, and then we finish what we started. The men settled in for the night, building their fire in Kanji's fire pit, sleeping in the shelter he had built. They laughed and joked, passing a bottle of whiskey, confident in their eventual success. They were 8 armed men against 1 Indian and a broken girl. The outcome seemed inevitable. 10 miles north, Kanji finally stopped in a narrow canyon where a small cave provided shelter from wind and concealment from sight. He helped Hannah off the travois, carried her into the cave, and made her as comfortable as possible with the blankets. She was shivering despite the relative warmth, shock and pain, combining to overwhelm her system. Rest now. We are safe for tonight. What about tomorrow? Kanji stared out at the darkness, his hand resting on the rifle across his knees. Tomorrow we keep moving, and the day after. As many days as it takes. You cannot run forever, no. But I can run long enough to get you somewhere safe. After that, the running stops. Hannah heard something in his voice, something hard and final. What do you mean? Kanji turned to look at her, and in the dim light from the small fire he had built, his face looked like it was carved from stone. I mean that once you are safe, I am going back. I'm going to find these men, and I'm going to make sure they never hurt anyone again. You will die, probably. But some things are worth dying for. Hannah wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that revenge would not heal anything, would not bring back his family or hers. But she was too tired, too broken, and the words would not come. Instead, she closed her eyes and let exhaustion take her, trusting this stranger who had saved her life, this warrior who carried his own ghosts but still found room to care for hers. Outside the cave, Kanji sat watch through the night. He did not sleep, could not afford to. Every sound in the darkness could be danger approaching. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves. He had learned during the wars that vigilance was the price of survival, and old lessons died hard. As the night deepened and stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, Gangi thought about the path that had led him here, thought about all the choices that had brought him to this moment, sitting in a cave, protecting a white woman from white men, while his own people fought for survival against an army that wanted them erased. The irony was not lost on him, but irony did not change the facts. Hannah Winters needed help. He could provide it, and in helping her, maybe he could start to balance some small portion of the debt he owed to all the people he had failed to help before. Redemption, he was learning, was not a destination. It was a direction, and sometimes the only way forward was through the fire. Dawn broke over the mountains with the kind of beauty that made you forget, for just a moment, that the world was full of people trying to kill each other. The sky turned from black to deep purple to blazing orange, painting the snow-capped peaks in colors that had no names. Gangi watched the sunrise from the mouth of the cave, his body stiff from a night spent sitting upright against cold stone, but his mind sharp and alert. He had not slept, would not sleep until he knew for certain whether Pike and his men had picked up their trail. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Behind him in the cave, Hannah stirred. The sound she made was small, pained, the noise of someone whose body was reminding them of every injury inflicted over the past 3 months. Gangi heard her try to stifle a cry as she attempted to shift position, heard the sharp intake of breath when broken ribs protested. He did not turn around, gave her the dignity of suffering without an audience. When she finally spoke, her voice was stronger than yesterday, rougher but more present. How far did we come? 10 miles, maybe 12. Not far enough if they are determined. Will they follow us into the high country? Gangi finally turned to face her. Men like Pike do not stop because terrain gets difficult. They stop when they are dead or when their target is dead. Nothing in between matters to them. He moved deeper into the cave, checked the bandages he had wrapped around her feet the night before. Blood had seeped through in places, but not as much as he feared. The cuts were closing slowly, her body beginning the long process of healing itself. He replaced the soiled bandages with fresh ones torn from his spare shirt, his hands surprisingly gentle for someone who had spent years dealing death. We will move again in an hour. I want to put another 5 miles between us and them before the sun gets high. After that we rest during the heat and move again at dusk. That is too much. I cannot, you can, and you will. Because the alternative is going back to them, and I do not think either of us wants that. The bluntness of his words cut through any argument Hannah might have made. She nodded, jaw set with determination that impressed Gangi despite himself. She was tougher than she looked, this girl who had survived what would have broken most people. There was iron somewhere inside her, buried beneath the trauma but not destroyed by it. They ate a cold breakfast of dried venison and the last of the wild onions Gangi had gathered. No fire, nothing that would create smoke visible from miles away. The meat was tough, required serious chewing, but it provided energy, and that was all that mattered. Hannah forced herself to eat, even though her stomach rebelled, understanding instinctively that strength would come from fuel, even if her body was not ready to want it. While she ate, Gangi scouted the area around the cave. He moved like smoke through the forest, silent and nearly invisible, reading the landscape for signs of pursuit. What he found made his jaw tighten. 3 miles back, maybe less, fresh tracks. 8 horses, moving in single file, following the route Gangi had taken through the night. They were being tracked by someone good, someone who could read sign in darkness, someone who understood how prey moved when it was desperate. He returned to the cave with urgency in his movements. They are closer than I thought. 3 miles back, moving steady. We need to go now. Hannah did not waste time with questions. She let Gangi lift her onto the travois, bit down on the leather strap to keep from crying out, and prepared herself for another day of pain and flight. They moved out of the cave and headed deeper into the mountains, following a path that climbed steadily upward toward the high passes where snow never completely melted even in summer. The terrain grew more treacherous with every mile. Loose scree that shifted under the horses' hooves. Narrow paths along cliff faces where one misstep meant a fatal fall. Dense stands of pine that grew so close together you had to dismount and lead the horse through gaps barely wide enough for man and animal. Kangi chose the most difficult route deliberately, knowing that what slowed them down would slow their pursuers even more. By midday they had climbed 2,000 feet in elevation. The air was thinner here, harder to breathe, especially for Hannah, whose ribs made every breath a negotiation with pain. Kangi stopped in a small clearing, surrounded by massive boulders that provided cover and visibility. He helped Hannah off the travois and into a sitting position against one of the rocks, then climbed to the highest boulder to survey their back trail. What he saw made his blood run cold. The regulators were closer now, maybe 2 miles back, and they had split into 2 groups. 5 men following the main trail Kangi had left, 3 others swinging wide to the east, trying to flank them or cut them off. It was a smart tactic, the kind of coordination that spoke of military training or extensive hunting experience. Pike was not just brutal, he was competent, and that made him far more dangerous. Kangi climbed down and moved to where Hannah rested. His face must have betrayed his concern because her eyes widened when she saw his expression. How bad? They split their force. 5 following us, 3 trying to get ahead and trap us. We cannot outrun them anymore. Then what do we do? Kangi looked around the clearing, studying the terrain with the eye of a warrior who had fought more battles than he cared to remember. The boulders provided natural fortification. The approaches were limited, 3 narrow paths that made it difficult for multiple attackers to coordinate. If they were going to make a stand, this was as good a place as any. We stop running. We make them pay for every foot they gain. You mean fight them, I mean survive them. There is a difference. He began preparing the clearing as a defensive position. Moved smaller rocks to create cover he could shoot from, positioned Hannah behind the largest boulder where she would be protected from gunfire, checked his rifle, counted his ammunition. 47 rounds. Not enough for a prolonged fight, but enough if he made every shot count. Hannah watched him work with growing dread. This is because of me. You are going to die because you helped me. Kangi paused, looked at her with eyes that had seen too much death to fear his own. I was dead 20 years ago when my family burned. Everything since then has been borrowed time. If I spend it protecting someone who deserves protecting, that is a better death than most men get. Before Hannah could respond, the sound of horses reached them, distant but approaching. The main group had closed the distance faster than Kangi anticipated. He moved to his shooting position, settled in behind cover with his rifle, and waited. The first rider appeared at the edge of the clearing 15 minutes later. Harker, the scarred brute who served as Pike's enforcer. He sat on his horse at the mouth of one of the trails, studying the clearing with suspicious eyes. Behind him, 4 more riders spread out, staying in the trees, not exposing themselves. Kangi had a clear shot. Could have put a bullet through Harker's chest and dropped him before the others even knew they were under fire. But killing the first man would start a fight that might not end well. Better to try words first, even if he doubted they would work. This is far enough. Kangi's voice carried across the clearing, amplified by the natural acoustics of the stone. The riders froze, hands moving to weapons, eyes scanning for the source of the voice. You are trespassing on ground you do not own, hunting prey you have no right to claim. Turn around, leave, live. Harker spit tobacco juice, his scarred face twisting into something between a grin and a snarl. That you doing the talking, Indian? Or is that the girl? It is me. The girl is under my protection. You will not touch her protection. Pike's voice joined the conversation, the leader emerging from the trees on a big roan stallion. That is a fancy word for what you are doing. We do not want trouble with you, Indian. Just give us the girl and you can ride away. Nobody needs to die today. Kangi shifted his aim slightly, now covering Pike instead of Harker. She is not yours to take. She is not anyone's to take. She is free and she will stay free. Pike laughed, a sound without humor. Free. Nothing is free out here. Everything has a price. That girl, she owes us for 3 months of food and shelter. We aim to collect what we are owed. You owe her. For murder, for rape, for torture. The debt is on your side. Now the smile disappeared from Pike's face, replaced by something colder. You do not know what you are talking about. That girl, she is a thief. Stole from us and ran. We are just recovering stolen property. Kanji's finger moved to the trigger. No more words. Turn around or die here. Those are your only choices. For a long moment, nothing moved except the wind through the pines. Then Pike raised his hand in a signal, and all 5 riders melted back into the forest, disappearing as quickly as they had appeared. Hannah let out a breath she did not realize she was holding. They left. No. Kanji did not lower his rifle, his eyes still scanning the tree line. They retreated. Different thing. They are going to wait for the flanking group to get in position, then attack from multiple sides. We have maybe an hour. He was right. 50 minutes later, gunfire erupted from 2 directions simultaneously. The 3 riders who had swung east had made it to the opposite side of the clearing and opened fire from elevated positions in the rocks. The original 5 attacked from the south, laying down suppressing fire while attempting to advance under cover. Kanji returned fire with calculated precision. He was not trying to kill, not yet, just trying to keep them pinned down and unable to advance. Each shot was aimed at the space just above their cover, forcing them to stay low, breaking up their coordination. He worked the lever action on his rifle like a machine. Fire and reload and fire again. Years of practice making the movements automatic. A bullet struck the rock near Hannah's head, spraying her with stone fragments. She screamed despite herself, covering her head with her arms. Kanji grabbed her and pulled her lower, shielding her body with his own, as more rounds impacted around them. Stay down. Do not look up. Do not move. The firefight continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 minutes. Kanji burned through 20 rounds, trying to hold position against 8 attackers, firing from multiple angles. He scored at least 3 hits, saw men cry out and fall back, but none of them stayed down. Body shots, painful but not fatal, bought time, but did not end the threat. Then something changed. The gunfire from the eastern position suddenly stopped. Kanji risked a glance and saw why. The 3 men who had been firing from the rocks were now moving, climbing down, trying to get closer under cover of their companions' fire. They were coordinating an assault, getting ready to rush the position all at once from different angles. Kanji made a decision. He could stay here and try to hold against a coordinated assault, probably die in the attempt. Or he could do something they would not expect. He grabbed Hannah, lifted her bodily, despite her cry of pain, and ran, not away from the attackers, but toward them, toward the eastern position the 3 men had just abandoned. It was insane, running toward the enemy, but it was also the one direction they would not expect or be watching. Bullets tore through the air where they had been standing seconds before. Kanji heard shouts of confusion as the regulators realized their prey was moving. He reached the rocks on the eastern side, found the path the 3 men had used to descend, and started climbing with Hannah over his shoulder like a sack of grain. The position the regulators had abandoned was perfect. Higher elevation, better cover, a commanding view of the entire clearing, including the positions where Pike's men were now exposed and confused. Kanji set Hannah down, brought his rifle up and started shooting. This time, he was not aiming to suppress. He was aiming to kill. The first shot took Jesse Cord in the chest, spun him around, and dropped him into the dirt, where he lay twitching. The second shot hit one of the other flanking men in the leg, shattered his femur, left him screaming. The third shot missed but came close enough to Pike that the leader dove for cover. Kanji kept firing, methodical and emotionless, giving the regulators a taste of their own medicine. They scattered like startled rabbits, abandoning their assault, running for better cover or for their horses. 2 more men went down, 1 dead and 1 wounded, before they managed to retreat out of effective range. Then silence, broken only by the moaning of wounded men and the ringing in everyone's ears from sustained gunfire. Kanji checked his ammunition. 14 rounds left, not nearly enough if they regrouped and tried again. But something in the quality of their retreat told him they would not. They had lost at least 2 men dead, 3 more wounded badly enough to need immediate medical attention. Pike would have to make a choice now between continuing to hunt Hannah or saving his remaining men. From the southern tree line, Pike's voice carried across the clearing, full of rage and promise. "This is not over, Indian. Not by a long shot. We will be back with more men, better weapons. And next time you will not be so lucky." Kangji did not waste breath on a response. He watched until he was certain they were gone, until the last echo of hoofbeats had faded into the distance. Then and only then did he lower his rifle and allow himself to breathe. Hannah was staring at him with eyes that held equal parts gratitude and horror. "You killed them. You actually killed them. I did what was necessary to keep us alive. But you moved so fast, shot so accurate. Where did you learn to fight like that?" Kanji met her eyes, and for the first time she saw the full weight of what he carried. "I learned in wars you never heard about. Wars between tribes before the white men came. Wars against the white men after they arrived. I learned because if you do not learn, you die. Simple as that." Hannah looked away, unable to hold his gaze. She was beginning to understand that the man who had saved her was not a gentle soul, forced to violence. He was a warrior who had chosen mercy, which was a different thing entirely. "More complicated, more dangerous. We need to move again. They will be back, just like Pike said. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but they will come. And next time they will be ready for what I can do. Where can we possibly go that they will not find us?" Kangi stood, helped Hannah to her feet. "North, always north. Into country so remote even my people rarely go there. If we can reach the high passes before snow falls, we can cross into territory where men like Pike do not dare follow. And if we cannot reach it in time, then we keep fighting until one side or the other is gone." They left the clearing behind, left the bodies of dead men for the scavengers, and continued north into mountains that grew taller and more forbidding with every mile. Behind them, Cyrus Pike and what remained of his gang were regrouping, tending their wounded, and planning their revenge. The hunter had become the hunted, but Pike was not the kind of man who accepted that reversal. He would come again, harder and meaner, and next time he would not underestimate the Dakota warrior protecting his prize. The war for Hannah Winter's freedom was far from over. It had only just begun. 3 days of hard travel brought them to a place that existed beyond maps and memory, a valley so remote that even the eagles seemed hesitant to fly overhead. The walls rose steep on all sides, granite faces streaked with veins of quartz that caught the afternoon sun and threw it back in scattered brilliance. A waterfall tumbled from the northern rim, feeding a small lake so clear you could see fish moving 30 feet down. Pine trees clustered thick around the water's edge, their roots drinking deep from soil that had never known a plough. Gangi led them to a spot on the eastern shore where a rock overhang created natural shelter, a place he had used years ago during a vision quest that had revealed nothing except his own capacity for endurance. He helped Hannah down from the travois with movements that had become routine over the past days, noting with satisfaction that she could now stand on her own for short periods without her legs buckling. "Progress, slow but real. We can rest here for a few days. Let your body heal before we push on." Hannah lowered herself carefully onto a flat rock near the water's edge, the simple act of sitting without being jostled, feeling like luxury beyond measure. "How did you find this place?" "My grandfather brought me here when I was 14. Said it was where young warriors came to learn who they really were, away from the tribe, away from expectations. You sat alone for 4 days, no food, only water, and waited for the spirits to speak. Did they speak to you?" Kanji began unpacking their meager supplies. His back to her. "No, all I heard was my own thoughts. And they were not particularly wise. Over the next few hours, Gangi established a proper camp for the first time since they had fled. He built a fire in a ring of stones, positioned to minimize smoke visibility from above. He set snares in the forest for rabbit and grouse. He gathered cattails from the lake edge, pulling the roots that could be roasted and eaten. The routine of making camp, of creating a temporary home, settled something in him that had been restless since finding Hannah beneath those branches. As twilight painted the valley in shades of purple and gold, they sat by the fire eating roasted fish that Kanji had caught with his bare hands, a skill his father taught him before his father was murdered. Hannah ate slowly, still not trusting her stomach to handle too much at once, but the food was good, and the setting so peaceful it almost made her forget that men were hunting them. "Nady, can I ask you something?" Kanji poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward into the darkening sky. "You can ask. I may not answer. That first night in your camp, you said you were there when my settlement burned. What did you mean?" The question hung between them like the smoke from their fire. Kanji was silent for so long that Hannah thought he might not answer at all. Then he set down the stick and looked at her directly, his eyes reflecting firelight. "I meant exactly what I said. I was there. Not at Bison Creek, but at dozens of places just like it. Settler cabins, mining camps, trading posts. I rode with war parties for 5 years after my family died, attacking anyone and anything connected to the white invasion of our lands." Hannah's breath caught. "You killed settlers, women and children too if they got in the way. We told ourselves it was justice, that we were defending our homeland, that every white death balanced the scales a little. We were wrong, but we believed it fiercely enough to make it feel true." The confession hit Hannah like a physical blow. She had known Kanji was a warrior, had seen him kill with practiced efficiency, but hearing him admit to the murder of families like hers created a chasm between them that had not existed moments before. "How many?" Kanji shook his head. "I stopped counting after 20. The numbers stopped mattering. Each one was a person, a life, a story I ended because I was too angry and too broken to see them as anything except symbols of my own pain." Hannah stood abruptly, or tried to, her legs still weak enough that she swayed and had to catch herself against a tree. "You are just like them, just like Pike and his men. You are a murderer." Yes, the simple agreement offered without defense or excuse somehow made it worse. Hannah wanted him to argue, to justify, to give her a reason to maintain the clear line between savior and monster. Instead, he gave her only truth. "So why did you save me? If you hate white people so much, if you killed families like mine, why pull those branches off and carry me away?" Kanji stared into the fire, seeing faces in the flames that only he could see. "Because 20 years of killing taught me that revenge is a hunger that feeds on itself. You kill to balance the scales, but the scales never balance. You always need one more death, one more act of violence to make the pain stop. And it never stops, ever." He looked up at her, and Hannah saw something in his expression that made her anger falter. It was not shame exactly, though that was present. It was exhaustion, the bone-deep weariness of a man who had carried hate for so long it had become his skeleton. "I saved you because I have spent 20 years becoming the thing I hated most. I have murdered innocent people the same way innocent people murdered my family. And in the process, I lost the one thing that made my wife and daughter's deaths mean something. I lost the chance to be better than the men who killed them." Hannah slowly lowered herself back to sitting, her mind struggling to reconcile the man who had protected her with the man who had burned settlements. "So what? Saving me is supposed to make up for all those people you killed? No, nothing makes up for that. Nothing ever could. But maybe if I can save one person, protect one life instead of taking it, I can prove to myself that I'm not entirely the monster I became." They sat in silence for a long time, the fire crackling between them, the weight of shared and separate traumas pressing down like the darkness gathering overhead. Finally, Hannah spoke again, her voice softer now. "Tell me about them. Your wife and daughter." Kangi's hands tightened on his knees, knuckles going white. "What? Because I told you about my family. Because if we are going to survive this together, I need to understand who you are. Not just the warrior, not just the killer. The man." Another long silence. Then slowly, As if the words were being pulled from some deep well he had sealed shut years ago, Kanji began to speak. Winona was her name. It means firstborn daughter in our language. She was 19 when we married. I was 22. Her father was against it at first, thought I was too wild, too eager for battle. He was right, but Winona saw something in me worth saving. His voice took on a quality Hannah had not heard before, something almost gentle beneath the roughness. She had a laugh that sounded like water over stones. Could track a deer better than most warriors. Made the best pemmican in 3 villages. When she smiled at me, I felt like the Creator himself had blessed my existence. And your daughter, Nita, it means bear. We named her that because when she was born, she came out fighting, fists swinging at the midwife, angry at the world for pulling her from the warm darkness. Winona said she had my spirit. Kanji's voice broke slightly. She was only 2 years old when they killed her. Had just learned to say full sentences. Her favorite phrase was ate, watch, which means father watch. She would do something, anything. Stack 2 rocks or pick a flower and then say ate, watch, because she wanted me to see her accomplish things. Hannah felt tears on her cheeks, though she had not realized she was crying. I'm sorry. Sorry does not bring them back. Sorry does not undo what happened. But thank you for saying it anyway. Is that why you stopped attacking settlers? Because you realized it would not bring them back? Partly. Mostly it was because I saw a child die, a white child, maybe 4 years old, caught in a burning cabin during one of our raids. She was screaming for her mother, and the mother was already dead, and I just stood there watching. And suddenly all I could see was Nita. All I could hear was her voice saying, ate, watch, while she burned. He wiped at his face roughly. I walked away that night. Left the war party, left my people, left everything. Spent the next 15 years alone in these mountains, trying to forget. Trying to become nothing so I would not have to be what I had become. Hannah moved closer to the fire, closer to Kangi, the fear she had felt moments ago transforming into something more complex. You are not nothing. Most days I'm not sure what I am. You are someone who made terrible choices and is trying to make better ones. That is more than most people manage. Kangi looked at her with surprise. You can forgive me that easily. After what I admitted, I did not say I forgave you. I do not know if I can. But I understand you better now. And understanding is different than forgiveness. Sometimes it has to be enough. They talked through the night, the conversation moving from heavy confession to lighter topics and back again. Hannah told him about her childhood in Ohio, about her mother teaching her to read, about her father's dreams of building something lasting in the Dakota Territory. Kanji told her about growing up in a village that no longer existed, about learning to hunt from his grandfather, about the old ways that were dying with every year the white settlers pushed further west. As dawn approached, painting the valley walls in shades of pink and orange, Hannah asked the question that had been building since their conversation began. What happens after you get me to safety? What happens to you? Kanji stood, stretched muscles stiff from sitting too long. They go back, find Pike and what is left of his gang. Make sure they can never hurt anyone else. That is suicide. Probably, but it is also justice. Those men have terrorized settlers and Indians alike for years. Someone needs to stop them, and I am the only someone available. There has to be another way. We could find a marshal, report them to the authorities. Kanji laughed without humor. You think the authorities care about crimes committed against settlers 40 miles from the nearest town? You think they care about what happens to a Dakota warrior? The law is for people who have power, and we have none. So you are just going to throw your life away for revenge. Not revenge. Justice. There is a difference, is there? Because from where I am sitting, it looks like you want to die. Like you have been wanting to die for 20 years, but could not figure out how to do it in a way that felt meaningful. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. The accusation struck deeper than Hannah intended. Kanji turned away, his jaw working as he processed emotions he was not equipped to express. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Maybe you are right. Maybe I have been looking for an honorable death since the dishonorable life I have lived became too heavy to carry. But even if that is true, Pike and his men still need to be stopped. My motivation does not change that fact. What if we found another way? What if instead of dying to stop them, you lived to stop them? Built a case, gathered evidence, found people they hurt who would testify. That would take months, maybe years. And in that time, how many more people suffer?" Hannah grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. "I suffered for 3 months. Every day was hell. Every night was worse. But I survived because somewhere deep inside, I believe someone would help me eventually. You were that someone. Do not throw that away by becoming the same kind of monster you fought against. I am already that monster. Then change. Be something different. You saved my life, Kangi. That means something. That means you are capable of being more than your worst actions." The sun broke over the eastern rim of the valley, flooding the space with golden light. Kangi stood in that light, torn between the path of violence that had defined most of his adult life and something else, something harder and more uncertain. The path of actually living instead of just surviving. "I do not know if I can be what you are asking. You do not have to know right now. You just have to keep choosing the next right thing, one choice at a time. That is all any of us can do." They spent the day resting in the valley, letting the peace of the place work its way into bones that had known mostly fear and flight for too long. Genji taught Hannah how to make proper snares, how to read animal tracks, how to find north when clouds covered the sky. Small skills, practical knowledge, things she would need if she was going to survive in a territory that had already taken her family. In return, Hannah talked about the world beyond the frontier, about cities and schools and ideas that seemed foreign to someone who had spent most of his life in wilderness. She described books she had read, music she had heard, art she had seen in museums during a trip to Cincinnati with her mother. Kangi listened with the attention of someone hearing about a planet he would never visit, but found fascinating anyway. As evening fell again, they sat by a fire that felt less like survival and more like companionship. The gap between them, the one created by Kangi's confession, had not disappeared, but had shifted into something they could both live with. Not forgiveness, not exactly, but understanding seasoned with tentative trust. "Tomorrow we need to make a decision." Kangi stirred the fire with his stick. "We can keep running north, try to reach Canada before winter. Or we can circle back, find a settlement where you can get proper help and start over. What about you? I do what needs doing." Hannah shook her head. "No, we figure this out together. You do not get to save my life and then throw away yours. That is not how this works. I'm not sure you get to decide how this works. Watch me." They argued good-naturedly for another hour, neither willing to concede the point, both recognizing that something had shifted between them over the past days. They were no longer just victim and rescuer. They were two people who had seen the worst of each other and humanity, who carried scars that would never fully heal, but who had somehow found in each other a reason to keep trying. The next morning would bring new decisions, new dangers, new challenges. But tonight, in a valley beyond the reach of men like Pike, sitting by a fire that warmed more than just their bodies, Kangi and Hannah allowed themselves to simply exist without the weight of past or future pressing down. It was the first peace either had known in longer than they could remember. The peace lasted 3 days before reality came looking for them in the form of a single rider approaching from the south. Kangi spotted him from the high rocks where he had been keeping watch, a distant figure moving carefully through terrain that should have been impossible to navigate without prior knowledge of the valley. This was no random traveler. Someone had tracked them here, through miles of wilderness designed to hide, through paths that left no obvious trail. Kangi descended quickly, his hand already on his rifle. "We have company." One rider coming slow and careful. Could be a scout for Pike, could be something else. Hannah struggled to her feet, her body still protesting sudden movements despite days of rest and healing. "What do we do?" You stay hidden in the rocks. I go see who it is and what they want. If shooting starts, you run north along the lakeshore until you find the game trail that leads up and over the western rim. Follow it down the other side and keep moving. Do not stop. Do not look back. I'm not leaving you. You will if I tell you to. This is not negotiable, Hannah. Before she could argue further, Kangi moved toward the southern approach, using trees and boulders for cover, his rifle ready but not yet raised. As the rider drew closer, details emerged that made Kangi's jaw tighten. The horse was a cavalry mount, U.S. Army brand visible even from a distance. The rider wore a mixture of civilian and military clothing, and most telling of all, he rode with the posture of someone who expected to be shot at, but was betting his life that he would not be. When the rider reached the edge of the clearing where Hannah and Kangi had made camp, he stopped and raised both hands high, demonstrating he held no weapon. His voice carried across the space, younger than Kangi expected, nervous but determined. I am looking for a Dakota warrior traveling with a white woman. My name is Jesse Cord. I'm not here to fight. Kangi emerged from cover with his rifle pointed directly at Jesse's chest. I know who you are. You are one of the men who held Hannah prisoner, one of Pike's regulators. Give me one reason I should not shoot you where you sit. Jesse's hands stayed raised, but his eyes met Kangi's without flinching. Because I am the one who let her escape. Because I am the one who has been leaving false trails to slow Pike down. Because I am the one who can help you stop him permanently. Words are wind. Why should I believe anything you say? Jesse slowly reached into his jacket, moving deliberately to avoid getting shot. He pulled out a leather journal and tossed it to the ground between them. That belonged to Pike. It is a record of everyone he has killed, everyone he has robbed, everyone he has hurt over the past 5 years. Names, dates, locations. Everything you would need to see him hang legally instead of dying in some shootout in the mountains. Kangi did not move to pick up the journal, his rifle still trained on Jesse. You could have taken that to a marshal yourself. Why bring it here? Because marshals do not care about crimes against settlers unless there is political pressure. But if a survivor like Hannah testifies, if she has documentation, if there are other witnesses willing to come forward, then it becomes a case they cannot ignore. I need her alive and willing to speak. I need you to make sure she stays that way. And what do you get out of this arrangement? Jesse's hands slowly lowered as he realized Kangi was not going to shoot immediately. I get to sleep at night without seeing the faces of everyone Pike made me help hurt. I get to be something other than a coward who watched evil happen and did nothing. From her hiding spot in the rocks, Hannah had been listening to every word. Against Kangi's explicit instructions, she emerged into the open, her movement drawing both men's attention. Jesse's face went pale when he saw her, saw the fading bruises and the way she moved with careful pain. Miss Winters, I do not. Hannah's voice was sharp as broken glass. Do not apologize. Do not tell me you are sorry. Do not try to make yourself feel better about what you did by pretending words can fix anything. I was not going to. Jesse dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible. I was going to say that I am glad you are alive, and that I will do whatever it takes to make sure Pike pays for what he did to you and everyone else. Hannah walked closer, studying Jesse's face with the intensity of someone memorizing features for later identification. You held me down while others hurt me. You laughed when I cried. You are as guilty as Pike. Yes, the simple agreement without excuse or justification mirrored what Kangi had done days earlier. Hannah felt the same frustrated anger at being denied the satisfaction of argument. So why are you here? Why now? Why risk Pike's anger and Kangi's bullet to bring us that journal? Jesse was quiet for a moment, staring at the ground between them. My mother was like you, taken by raiders when she was 16, held for 8 months, used and broken and discarded. She never recovered, drank herself to death by the time I was 10. I grew up watching what that kind of violence does to someone, watching it kill her slowly from the inside out. He finally looked up, his eyes wet. When Pike took you, when I saw what they were doing, I told myself it was different, that you were different. that somehow you deserved it or could handle it, or that it was not my responsibility to stop. But every time I looked at you, I saw my mother, and I knew I was becoming the same kind of monster that destroyed her. Kangi lowered his rifle slightly, not all the way, but enough to show he was listening. What happened to the rest of Pike's gang? How many are still with him? 4 men, including Pike. We lost 2 in the firefight 3 days ago. 3 more broke off after that. They saw how you fought, saw that you were willing to kill, and decided collecting on Hannah was not worth dying over. But Pike, he is not rational anymore. This has become personal for him. He will come after you with whatever men he has left, and he will not stop until one side is dead. Then we give him what he wants. Kangi's voice was flat, decided. We set a trap. Use Hannah as bait. And this? No. Hannah's response was immediate and fierce. I'm not bait. I'm not a tool for your revenge. If we are doing this, we do it the right way. We take Pike's journal to the nearest town with a telegraph. We contact territorial authorities. We build a case that puts him in prison for the rest of his life. That could take weeks. In that time, Pike kills more people, so we move fast. Jesse stepped forward, his voice gaining confidence. There is a mining town called Silver Creek, about 30 miles northeast. It has a telegraph office, a part-time marshal, and a judge who rides the circuit and will be there next week. If we can get there, if we can convince the marshal to hold Pike when he shows up, he will show up. Kangi finished the thought. Because he is following Hannah, and Hannah will be there. It is still using me as bait. No. Jesse shook his head. It is using you as a witness. There is a difference. In the first scenario, you are helpless prey, waiting to be caught. In the second, you're someone making a choice to face your abuser in a place where law still means something. Hannah looked between the 2 men, saw them both watching her, waiting for her decision. For 3 months she had been powerless, her choices taken away, her voice silenced. Now they were offering her the power to decide, and it was terrifying in a completely different way. If we do this, if we go to Silver Creek and I testify, Pike will know where I am. He will come for me, yes. And there is no guarantee the law will protect me. Marshals die, judges get bribed, evidence disappears. Also, yes, so why should I risk it? Why not just run, change my name, disappear into some other territory where Pike will never find me? Kangi spoke quietly, his words carrying weight beyond their simple meaning. Because running means he wins. Running means every other person he hurts. You carry part of that weight. I know because I ran for 15 years, and the weight never got lighter. Hannah closed her eyes, feeling the sun on her face, hearing the waterfall in the background, smelling the pine trees that surrounded this hidden valley. She thought about her family burning, about 3 months in hell, about the choice between fear and courage that everyone faces eventually. When she opened her eyes, her voice was steady. We go to Silver Creek, we face Pike, and we end this the right way. Not with more blood in the dirt, but with justice that actually means something. The journey to Silver Creek took 4 days of hard travel through territory that grew more populated with each mile. They passed mining camps and settler cabins, saw the scars of civilization cutting into land that had been wilderness just years before. Jesse rode slightly ahead, scouting the trail, while Kangi and Hannah followed at a distance that allowed them to react if trouble appeared. On the second night, camped in a narrow canyon that provided concealment, Hannah finally asked Jesse the question that had been burning in her mind since he appeared. Why did Pike take me in the first place? Why not just kill my family and move on? Jesse poked at their small fire with a stick, his face haunted by memory. Pike has a thing about ownership. It is not enough for him to take what he wants. He needs to break what he takes, prove that he is stronger, that he owns it completely. Your father defied him, challenged him publicly. So Pike did not just kill him. He took you to prove that even your father's daughter could be owned, could be broken. Hannah's hands clenched into fists. I was not broken, I know. That is what drove Pike crazy. 3 months, and you never stopped looking at him like he was garbage. Never stopped fighting in the ways you could. That is why he decided to kill you. Because he could not break you, and that was worse than any defiance. Kangi, who had been listening silently, spoke up. Men like Pike, they do not understand that strength is not about dominating others. Real strength is what Hannah showed. Surviving when survival seems impossible. Maintaining humanity when everyone around you has lost theirs. The conversation lapsed into silence, each of them lost in thoughts about the confrontation ahead. Jesse eventually excused himself to take first watch, leaving Kangi and Hannah alone by the fire. "Are you afraid?" Kangi's question was soft, genuine, terrified, but also angry, and tired of being afraid. So maybe the anger will be enough to get me through. Anger is a tool. A good one if you control it instead of letting it control you. Is that what you learned in your 20 years of violence? Among other things. I also learned that the line between justice and revenge is thinner than most people want to believe. We tell ourselves we want justice, but what we really want is for the people who hurt us to suffer the way we suffered. The trick is recognizing that impulse and choosing something better. Hannah studied his face in the firelight, seeing the scars and the weariness and something else, something that might have been hope, struggling to survive in hostile territory. "You have changed since we met. Or maybe I am just seeing you differently, maybe both. You have changed too. Stronger, more sure of yourself, or just better at pretending. That is what strength is sometimes. Pretending until the pretending becomes real." They reached Silver Creek on the afternoon of the 4th day, riding in openly because hiding would only create suspicion. The town was rough and unfinished, the kind of place that sprang up wherever gold or silver was rumored to exist. 24 buildings clustered along a single muddy street, including a general store, 3 saloons, a livery stable, and a small office with a sign that read "Marshal" hanging crooked above the door. The marshal was a man named Tobias Grant, 50 years old with grey in his beard and eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. He listened to their story with a skepticism that gradually transformed into grim interest as Jesse produced Pike's journal and Hannah described her ordeal. "This is serious business you are bringing me." Grant flipped through the journal, his expression darkening with each page. If even half of what is written here is true, Pike is responsible for dozens of murders and God knows what else. But bringing him in, that is another matter entirely. He will come here. Jesse leaned forward in his chair. He is tracking Hannah and he knows this is the nearest town. When he shows up, you can arrest him with what evidence? A journal stolen by one of his own gang members and the testimony of a girl he will claim is lying. I need more than that to hold him for the circuit judge. Then we get more. Hannah's voice was firm. Jesse said there are other victims in Pike's journal, people who survived. If we can find even 2 or 3 willing to testify, along with my statement and the journal, that should be enough. Grant considered this, his fingers drumming on his desk. It might work, but it means you staying here in town where Pike can find you. Means using you as bait, whether you call it that or not. I know what it means. I am willing. The marshal looked at Kangi, who had been silent throughout the conversation. And you, what is your stake in this? I'm making sure Hannah survives long enough to see justice done. After that, my stake is finished. Grant's eyes narrowed. You are the Dakota warrior who shot up Pike's gang in the high country. Word of that reached even here. Some folks would call you a hero. Others would call you a murderer. Which are you? Kangi met the marshal's gaze without flinching. I'm someone who did what was necessary to protect an innocent person. You can call that whatever helps you sleep at night. Fair enough. Grant stood, signaling the meeting was over. I will send telegrams to the names in this journal. See who is willing to come testify. In the meantime, you 3 stay close to town. Do not give Pike an easy shot at you in the open. When he comes, and he will come, we handle this legal and proper. No vigilante justice. No shootouts in my street. Clear, they all nodded agreement, though Kangi's nod was slower and less convincing than the others. Grant noticed, but said nothing, recognizing that some promises were made with fingers crossed behind backs. Over the next 3 days, the trap was set. Grant sent his telegrams and received responses from 6 people willing to testify against Pike. The circuit judge moved up his schedule and would arrive in 4 days. Hannah stayed in a room above the general store, under guard, visible enough to be found, but protected enough to discourage a direct assault. Jesse and Kangi took turns watching the approaches to town, waiting for the storm they knew was coming. Pike arrived on the 4th day, riding in at dusk with 3 men behind him, all of them armed and dangerous, and beyond caring about consequences. They tied their horses in front of the largest saloon and walked inside like they owned the place, like they owned the whole territory. Within an hour, everyone in Silver Creek knew Pike was in town. Within 2 hours, Marshal Grant had assembled a group of armed citizens willing to help him make the arrest. By nightfall, 2 opposing forces were preparing for a confrontation that would determine not just Hannah's fate, but whether law meant anything at all in a place this far from civilization. Kengi checked his rifle for the 10th time, counting ammunition he already knew he had. Tomorrow it ends one way or another. Hannah, looking out the window at the saloon where Pike was drinking, felt her heart pound with equal parts fear and anticipation. Yes, tomorrow it ends. Dawn came to Silver Creek with the kind of stillness that precedes violence. The air so quiet you could hear individual heartbeats if you listened close enough. Ganji had not slept, had spent the night watching Pike's men through the window of the livery stable where he had positioned himself. They had stayed in the saloon until past midnight, drinking and laughing and making threats loud enough to carry across the street. Now, as morning light turned the eastern sky from black to gray to pale blue, they were emerging with weapons in hand and murder in their eyes. Marshal Grant had positioned his makeshift deputies at strategic points around town. 6 men, total miners and shopkeepers, who knew how to shoot but had never shot at another human being. Their nervousness was visible in the way they gripped their rifles too tight, in the sweat on their faces despite the cool morning air. Grant himself stood in the middle of the main street, his badge catching the first rays of sunlight, a double-barreled shotgun cradled in his arms. Cyrus Pike. Grant's voice carried the weight of official authority, even if his force did not inspire much confidence. You are under arrest for murder, kidnapping, extortion, and about 20 other charges I can list, if you have time to hear them. Drop your weapons and come peacefully. Pike stepped off the saloon porch, his 3 remaining men fanning out behind him. Parker was there, his scarred face twisted into a grin. 2 others Kangi did not recognize, hard-eyed killers who had probably signed on after the losses in the mountains. Pike himself looked worse than when Kangi last saw him, thinner, meaner, like something that had stopped pretending to be human. That is a mighty bold statement, Marshal, coming from a man with 6 scared civilians backing him up. You really think you can take us? I think the law says I can. Whether you make it easy or hard is up to you. Pike laughed to sound like breaking glass. The law. Out here, the law is whatever the man with the fastest gun says it is. And I got news for you, Marshal. I'm faster than you and everyone standing behind you combined. Then I guess we find out. The moment stretched tight as wire. Ganji, watching from the livery stable, had his rifle trained on Pike's chest. 1 shot would end it. 1 bullet and the man responsible for so much suffering would be dead before he hit the ground. But Hannah's words echoed in his mind. We do this the right way. Justice that actually means something. From the 2nd floor of the general store, Hannah watched through her window with her heart in her throat. Jesse stood beside her, his own rifle ready, his face pale but determined. This was the moment everything had been building toward. The confrontation that would determine whether courage and testimony mattered or whether violence would have the final word, as it always seemed to in this territory. Pike's hand moved toward his gun. Not fast, not yet drawing, just resting on the grip in a gesture everyone recognized as prelude to action. You know what I think, Marshal? I think you are bluffing. I think you do not have enough evidence to hold me, even if you do arrest me. I think this is about revenge for what I did to that lying little whore up in the general store. Hannah is her name. Grant's voice stayed level despite the provocation. And she is not the only witness. Got 6 more arriving on today's stage, all with stories about what you done, all willing to testify. Your journal helped with that, the one your boy Jesse stole. Makes for interesting reading." Pike's face darkened with rage as he turned to look at the general store, as if he could see through walls to where Jesse was standing. "Jesse, you backstabbing coward. After everything I taught you, you taught me how to be a monster." Jesse's voice carried from the second-floor window, shaking but audible. "I'm done being that. I'm done hurting people for you." Pike's hand closed on his gun grip. "Then you are just done." Everything happened in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Pike drew with speed born of decades of killing. Marshal Grant raised his shotgun. The deputies tried to aim but froze, their inexperience showing. And Kanji, watching it all unfold like a nightmare in slow motion, made a choice. He did not shoot Pike. Instead, he shot the man to Pike's right, the one whose rifle was already swinging toward the deputies. The bullet took the man in the shoulder, spun him around, made him drop his weapon. A non-lethal shot, deliberately placed, because Hannah had asked him to be better than revenge. The sound of Kanji's rifle broke whatever spell had held everyone frozen. Grant's shotgun roared, buckshot tearing into the saloon porch inches from Pike's feet. The deputies opened fire, their shots wild but numerous enough to force Pike and his men to dive for cover. Windows shattered, wood splintered. The quiet morning erupted into chaos. Pike scrambled behind a water trough, returning fire with both pistols, his face twisted with fury. "You want war, old man, you got it." Kangi worked the lever on his rifle, fired again, this time shattering a window above Pike's head. He was not trying to kill, not yet, just trying to keep Pike pinned down until Grant could coordinate his deputies. But Pike was too experienced, too dangerous. He was already moving, using the confusion to work his way toward the side of the building where he would have a clear shot at the general store. Jesse saw it happening, saw Pike's intention, saw the angle that would put him in position to shoot through Hannah's window. Without thinking, without hesitating, Jesse burst from the general store and ran into the street. Placing himself between Pike and his target, Pike's bullet caught Jesse in the chest before he made it 3 steps. The impact threw him backward, his rifle clattering into the dust. He lay there gasping, blood spreading across his shirt, his eyes wide with shock and something that might have been relief. Hannah screamed, a sound that cut through the gunfire like a knife. She grabbed Jesse's fallen rifle from where he had left it leaning against the wall and did something that horrified and amazed Kanji in equal measure. She ran down the stairs and into the street, into the middle of the firefight, and knelt beside Jesse. Kangi's heart stopped. He left his position in the livery and sprinted toward her, knowing he would be too slow, knowing Pike would see the opportunity and take it. Time seemed to stretch, each second lasting an hour. He saw Pike rising from behind the water trough, saw the pistol coming up, saw Hannah looking up and realizing her mistake too late. The shot came from an unexpected direction. Not from Kanji, not from Grant or the deputies, but from Harker, Pike's scarred enforcer. Except Harker was not shooting at Hannah. He was shooting at Pike. The bullet hit Pike in the arm, made him drop one of his pistols, made him spin toward Harker with betrayal written across his face. "What are you doing?" Harker's rifle was steady, aimed at his former leader's chest. "I am done. Done following you, done killing for you, done pretending this is anything except evil. That kid just died protecting someone, and I realized I have never protected anyone in my whole worthless life. So I'm done." Pike stared at him with incomprehension that transformed into rage. "You are all traitors. Every single one of you. Fine. I will kill the girl myself, and every coward who stands with her." He raised his remaining pistol, aiming at Hannah, who was still kneeling beside Jesse in the open street. Kanji ran faster, knowing he would not make it, knowing he was about to watch another innocent person die because he had hesitated, because he had chosen principle over action. But Hannah was not helpless. She raised Jesse's rifle with hands that had held her family as they burned, with arms that had endured 3 months of brutality, with a strength that came from somewhere deeper than muscle or bone. She aimed at the man who had destroyed her life and pulled the trigger. The shot was not clean. Hannah had never fired a rifle before, had no training, no practice. The bullet hit Pike in the leg instead of the chest, dropped him to one knee, made him howl with pain and fury. But it was enough. Enough time for Kanji to reach Hannah and cover her body with his own. Enough time for Marshal Grant to close the distance with his shotgun. Enough time for Harker to fire again. This shot deliberate and final. Pike fell backward into the dust, his pistol falling from nerveless fingers, his eyes staring up at the morning sky with an expression of surprise that he had time to die, feeling anything at all. Around him the shooting stopped. His two remaining men, seeing their leader down and their own enforcer turned against them, threw down their weapons and raised their hands in surrender. The silence that followed was deafening. Hannah, still beneath Kangi's protective crouch, was shaking so hard she could barely breathe. Kangi helped her to her feet, checked her for injuries, found none except the trauma of what she had just done. Jesse lay nearby, still alive but fading, blood pooling beneath him. Marshal Grant knelt beside Jesse, pressing a cloth against the wound to slow the bleeding. Someone get the doctor. Now men scattered to obey, but everyone could see the truth in Jesse's pale face, in the way blood kept coming, despite the pressure. The bullet had found something vital, something that could not be fixed in a frontier town with a part-time doctor and limited supplies. Jesse's eyes found Hannah, and he smiled through the pain. I am sorry for everything, but mostly for taking so long to do the right thing. Hannah took his hand, tears streaming down her face. You saved my life. You came back and you saved my life. Had to. My mother, she never got justice. Never got someone to stand up for her. But you got me. Got Kanji. Got people who cared. That is worth dying for. You are not going to die. Hannah's voice was fierce, desperate. The doctor is coming. You are going to be fine. Jesse's smile widened slightly. You are a terrible liar. But thank you for trying. He died 30 seconds later, his hand still in Hannah's, his last breath a sigh that sounded almost peaceful. Hannah closed his eyes with shaking fingers, then stood and walked to where Pike's body lay in the dust. She looked down at the man who had haunted her nightmares, who had taken everything from her, who had died without understanding why everyone he thought he owned had turned against him. Kangi approached quietly, stood beside her without speaking. After a long moment, Hannah spoke, her voice hollow with exhaustion. I thought I would feel something. Relief or satisfaction or closure, but I just feel empty. That is what justice feels like sometimes. Not triumphant, not healing. Just the absence of one particular kind of pain, leaving room for all the others to be felt more clearly. Is it always like this? In my experience, yes. The people who tell you that revenge or justice will make you whole again, they are selling something. Truth is, nothing makes you whole after something breaks you. You just learn to live with the cracks. Marshal Grant joined them, his face grim. Circuit Judge will be here tomorrow. With Pike dead and his men willing to testify against each other for lighter sentences, this case is essentially over. You did good, Miss Winters. Both of you did good. Hannah turned away from Pike's body, unable to look at it anymore. What happens now? Now we document everything, hold a proper inquest, make sure the legal record is clear. You will need to give formal testimony about what Pike did. So will the other victims when they arrive. After that, Grant paused, considering his words carefully. After that, you figure out how to live the rest of your life. Over the next 3 days, Silver Creek transformed from the site of a gunfight into something resembling a courtroom. The circuit judge, a stern man named Whitmore, arrived and conducted proceedings with careful attention to detail. Hannah testified, her voice steady, despite the tears that came when describing her family's death. 5 other victims testified, each with their own story of Pike's cruelty. The evidence was overwhelming, the verdict on the dead man and his surviving accomplices swift and unforgiving. Through it all, Kangi watched from the back of the room, uncomfortable in the confines of civilization, but staying because Hannah needed someone who understood. When the proceedings finally concluded, when justice had been officially documented and recorded, Judge Whitmore called Hannah and Kanji forward. Miss Winters, you have shown remarkable courage throughout this ordeal. The territory owes you a debt, and you, Whitmore turned to Kanji, his expression unreadable. You present a unique situation. By all accounts, you saved Miss Winters' life and helped bring a dangerous criminal to justice. However, there are also reports of past actions that would normally warrant investigation. Kanji stood straight, ready for whatever judgment was coming. I will answer for my past, if that is what the law requires. Whitmore was quiet for a moment, then shook his head. The law is not just about punishment, Mr. Kanji. It is also about redemption and the recognition that people can change. Given your actions in this case, and given that any historical complaints would be difficult to substantiate this many years later, I am inclined to let sleeping dogs lie. Do not make me regret that decision. I will not. See that you do not. A week later, Hannah stood at the edge of Silver Creek, her few belongings packed in a bag that Kanji had made for her from deerhide. A stage was due to arrive shortly, heading east toward settlements where she could start over, where nobody knew her story unless she chose to tell it. Kanji stood beside her, his horse already saddled for his own departure. They had not discussed where he was going, and Hannah had not asked, understanding that some questions were better left unspoken. You could come with me. Build something new somewhere safe. Kanji shook his head gently. Your path goes east towards civilization and healing. Mine goes back into the mountains. I'm not meant for towns and judges and laws I still do not fully understand. What will you do? Keep living. Keep trying to be better than I was. Maybe find other people who need help, who are running from things they should not have to run from. There is always someone who needs help in this territory. That sounds lonely. I have been alone for 20 years. I'm used to it. Besides, being alone is not the same as being lonely. Not anymore. Hannah felt tears building, but refused to let them fall. You saved my life, Kanji. Not just from Pike, but from giving up. From letting what happened define everything I would ever be. You saved yourself. I just provided transportation and covering fire. That is not true, and you know it. Kanji smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his weathered face. Maybe. But let me have my modesty. It is one of the few virtues I possess. The stage appeared in the distance, a cloud of dust marking its approach. Hannah felt time accelerating, felt the moment of parting rushing toward her faster than she was ready for. She turned to Kanji and did something that surprised them both. She hugged him, fierce and quick, then stepped back before he could react. Thank you for everything, for seeing me as a person when everyone else saw property. For teaching me that strength is not about dominating others, for showing me that even people who have done terrible things can still choose to do good. Kangi's throat was tight, words difficult to find. Your family would be proud of you, of your strength, your courage, your refusal to let evil have the final word. I hope so. I know so. The stage pulled up, the driver calling for passengers. Hannah picked up her bag, took one last look at the warrior who had carried her from death to life, then climbed aboard. As the stage pulled away, she looked back through the window and saw Kanji standing where she left him, one hand raised in farewell, his figure growing smaller with each turn of the wheels. Kanji watched until the stage disappeared over the horizon, then mounted his horse and turned north toward the mountains. He had kept his word. He had gotten Hannah to safety, had helped her find justice, had proven to himself that he was capable of protecting life instead of just taking it. The weight he had carried for 20 years was not gone, would never be completely gone, but it was lighter, bearable. As he rode, Kanji thought about what came next. The mountains would always be there, offering solitude and space to think. But maybe he would spend less time hiding and more time watching for others who needed help. There were plenty of Hannahs in the territory, plenty of people running from things they should not have to face alone. The sun was setting behind the western peaks when Kanji made camp beside a small creek. He built a fire, cooked a simple meal, and sat watching stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, Hannah was heading toward a new life. Somewhere behind him, Pike was buried in an unmarked grave that nobody would ever visit. And here, between those 2 points, Kangi existed in the space between past and future. He thought about his wife and daughter, allowed himself to remember them without the crushing weight of guilt that usually accompanied such memories. They were gone. Nothing would bring them back. But Hannah was alive, and Jesse had died protecting her, and even Harker had found some spark of conscience at the end. Maybe redemption was not about erasing the past. Maybe it was about making different choices when similar moments arose. As sleep finally came, Kangi's last thought was not of death or violence, or the long list of sins he would never fully atone for. It was of a young woman with freckles and iron in her spine, riding toward a future she had earned through suffering and courage, and an absolute refusal to let cruelty have the final word. Some stories do not end with lovers under the same roof, or heroes riding off into sunsets together. Some stories end with 2 damaged people going separate ways, carrying scars that will never fully heal, but also carrying the knowledge that they made a difference, that they chose courage over convenience, justice over revenge, life over death, and maybe that is enough. Maybe that is what redemption looks like in a territory built on violence and stolen land and broken treaties. Not grand gestures or perfect endings, but small acts of grace extended to strangers who become, for a brief moment, the most important person in your world. The fire burned down to embers. The stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance. And in the Dakota Territory of 1876, 2 people who had every reason to become monsters chose instead to remain human. That choice, difficult and imperfect and costly as it was, made all the difference. 5 years passed like water through fingers, each season blending into the next until the events at Silver Creek felt like stories from another lifetime. The Dakota Territory continued its transformation, becoming less wild with each passing year as railroads pushed further into the mountains and settlements grew into towns. The frontier was closing, though few who lived through it recognized the change until it was already complete. Hannah Winters, now Hannah Brennan, after marrying a schoolteacher named David, lived in a modest house on the outskirts of Rapid City. She taught reading and arithmetic to children of miners and ranchers, finding purpose in education that her mother would have appreciated. The scars on her body had faded to thin white lines. The scars on her mind remained deeper, manifesting in nightmares that came less frequently but never disappeared entirely. She had 2 children now, a daughter named Emily and a son named Jesse, the latter named for the young man who had died protecting her. On quiet evenings, Hannah would sometimes sit on her porch and look west toward the mountains where Kangi had disappeared 5 years ago, wondering if he was still alive, still helping people who needed helping. In truth, Kangi was closer than she imagined. He had settled in the Black Hills, maintaining camps throughout the high country. His solitude was punctuated now by visitors. Runaway women fleeing abusive husbands, Indians displaced by broken treaties, Chinese railroad workers escaping servitude. Anyone running from something they should not have to run from found their way to Kangi somehow, guided by rumors passed through communities that existed in the margins. He had become a legend of sorts, the ghost warrior of the Black Hills who appeared when needed and vanished like smoke. His hair had gone mostly gray, his face more lined, but his eyes remained sharp, and his commitment to being something other than what he had been absolute. One autumn afternoon, a young Chinese woman named Lin Wei arrived at one of his camps with a letter from Hannah. The letter explained that Lin Wei had escaped from a brothel in San Francisco, had traveled over 1,000 miles seeking freedom, and needed help. It ended with words that made Kangi smile. If you are still doing what you were doing, then Lin Wei needs you. She reminds me of myself 5 years ago, broken but not defeated. Know that I think of you often, and that the life I have built is only possible because you chose mercy when you could have chosen indifference. Kangi helped Lin Wei reach safety in Canada, then sent his own letter back to Hannah. It was brief but carried weight in every sentence. You asked if I am well. The answer is complicated. My body ages, my past remains heavy, and some nights the ghosts are loud. But I am no longer the man who set fires and counted bodies. I'm no longer defined only by my worst actions. You helped teach me that, Hannah. So yes, in the ways that matter, years continued to pass. The Dakota Territory became South Dakota. The Indians were pushed onto reservations. The buffalo was slaughtered to near extinction. The frontier that had seemed endless proved finite after all. Kangi grew older, slower, his body finally beginning to betray him. He knew his time was limited, measured in seasons rather than decades. One autumn, with aspens turning gold, Kangi made his way to the hidden valley where he had once camped with Hannah. He arrived at midday and saw a campfire burning near the lakeshore. As he approached, a young man stood from beside the fire, maybe 17, with his mother's freckles. "Mr. Kangi, my name is Jesse Brennan. My mother sends her regards and asks that you forgive her for not coming herself. Her health is not what it was." Kangi felt concern stab through him. "She is ill. Consumption. The doctors say she has maybe a year. She wanted to make this journey, but could not manage the altitude. So she sent me instead." Jesse pulled out a package. Inside was a carefully crafted parfleche, decorated in the style of Kangi's people. "She made this for you. Spent 2 years learning how. She wanted you to have something that connected to who you were before everything went wrong." Inside, Kangi found a photograph of Hannah's family, a silver bracelet, and a final letter. Hannah wrote about her children, about the school she had helped establish, about the long, slow work of healing from wounds that never fully closed. The letter ended with words Kangi would carry with him. "You told me once that redemption was about making different choices when similar moments arose. I've spent 20 years teaching children that strength is about protecting others, not dominating them. That justice is better than revenge. That people can transform themselves into something better. I learned all of that from you, Kangi. Thank you for saving my life. Thank you for teaching me how to live it. And thank you for being proof that no one is beyond redemption if they are willing to do the work." Kangi read the letter 3 times, then looked at Jesse. "Tell your mother something for me." Jesse pulled out paper and pencil. "Tell her that she taught me as much as I taught her. That knowing she built a good life from wreckage has given my own life meaning I did not think possible. Tell her that when my time comes, I will go peacefully because I know that at least once I chose right. I chose her life over my anger, and that choice made all the difference." As Jesse rode away toward his mother, Kangi remained in the valley, watching the sun set. He thought about the families he had destroyed and the few he had saved. About Hannah and Jesse and all the others who had crossed his path when they needed someone to see them as human. The scales would never balance. The people he had killed would never be brought back. But sitting there as stars emerged, Kangi understood something he had not understood when he pulled those branches aside 5 years ago. Redemption was not about achieving balance or earning forgiveness. It was simply about choosing in each moment to be something other than your worst self. To see the person in front of you as deserving of help. To let mercy exist alongside justice, it was not enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. And sometimes, in a world that offered mostly nothing, something had to be sufficient. Kangi built his fire larger against the cold mountain night and allowed himself to remember without drowning in guilt. Tomorrow, there would be someone else who needed help. But tonight, in this valley where peace lived, he simply existed in the space between the warrior he had been and the man he had chosen to become. It was not forgiveness. It was not absolution. But it was something close to peace. And in the end, that was the only victory anyone could truly claim. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.